Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to this afternoon's webinar, Top Talent, How Can Small Employers Excel at Recruiting and Training? This is the second in a series of conversations that Reimagine Main Street and the U.S. Department of Commerce are organizing on the critical topic of job quality and good jobs from the vantage point of small and mid-sized employers. I'm Tammy Halevi, and it is my distinct pleasure to welcome all of you on behalf of our team at Reimagine Main Street, a project of the Public-Private Strategies Institute. Reimagine Main Street, we are focused on advancing equitable growth for small businesses and the people they employ on MLK Boulevard, Cesar Chavez Ways, Chinatowns, and Main Streets across the country. The initiative is centered around a multi-stakeholder cross-sector network, surveys of and engagement with small business owners to ensure that your voices are always at the center. And meetings and sessions like this are one critical way to engage on timely and important topics. Before we dive into the meat of today's conversation, I first want to thank all of the partners who helped us reach the hundreds of business owners on the line and who are deep in this important work. Please join me in expressing gratitude to all of these important organizations. So, why are we talking about good jobs and small employers, and why does it make sense for folks to take the time to tune in? We've joined forces with the terrific team at the Department of Commerce and others on this topic, primarily for three reasons. First, small employers, meaning businesses with fewer than 100 employees, represent about half of the U.S. labor market. These businesses matter. You matter. For employers, job quality can be a significant source of competitive advantage. Churn, as you know, has consequences, especially in a tight labor market, and strong job quality can reduce employee turnover and strengthen operational efficiency and competitiveness of a company. And finally, nobody on this call needs to be reminded that small employers are qualitatively different than large employers. There is a reason that the name CEO might actually mean Chief Everything Officer. We recognize that where large employers can assign an entire department and a task force to address elements of job quality, that's simply not the reality for small employers. Now that you know our why, I am delighted to welcome my colleague, Dave Langdon, the Deputy Director of Policy and Planning at the U.S. Department of Commerce, to offer his welcome on behalf of the department. Dave has been a terrific partner on this journey, and he is the reason that the Department of Commerce has a Good Jobs Toolkit. He shepherded that process through in collaboration with the Department of Labor from its start, and has been a terrific partner in making these webinars happen. Dave, welcome, and over to you.
Hey, thank you very much for the warm welcome, Tammy, and thank you for the partnership with PPSI. We're very excited about today's webinar and the opportunity to bring the story and concrete examples of how organizations, particularly small employers, are excelling at recruiting, developing, training their workforce that they need. We share your view about good jobs being the foundation of an equitable economy. Job quality benefits both people, families, and businesses. And it's really an imperative right now with the tight labor market. Many employers recognize the need to become employers of choice in order to succeed. And along the lines, they recognize the need to improve job quality. It's a continuum that we recognize. It's not one jobs aren't just good or bad, but I think all jobs, in our view, can become better. At the same time, it's a difficult journey that many companies have to face to identify the best strategies and the needs of their workers. To that end, we, with the Department of Labor, developed a set of good jobs principles that define, from a federal government's perspective, what a good job is and all the different characteristics of them, as well as a job quality toolkit that sets out a set of strategies, particularly aimed at smaller employers who want to go along the job quality journey. I'm very pleased to introduce Dr. Kelly Welsh from the NIST Quality Performance Excellence Program and partner in all these efforts to give you an overview of the Job Quality Toolkit. Dr. Welsh is an expert in organizational development and adult education, which makes her the perfect person to understand really the multiple levers we have to really move to improve job quality. She has a long career in academia and the nonprofit industry, and luckily for us now in the federal government, in many different areas. And she's been a partner on some cross-agency efforts with the department and the White House on areas including employer-provided training and currently on job quality. So Kelly, we're very much pleased to hand it to you.
Thanks, Dave. I sound great when Dave introduces me. I love it. So good afternoon, folks. I'll begin. Go ahead and go to the next slide, James. So Job Quality Toolkit. I think an important part of before we discuss this is to think about what is a good job. I think there's lots of different perspectives on this, and it can become very academic, but fundamentally, a good job is one where workers are respected and valued as an important part of an organization's success. And I don't mean that just in it makes for a good sentence. They're a true part of the organization's success, and they feel like they are. Next slide, James. So we've heard about the tight labor market, and it's been discussed, and we know that means lots of employers are looking to fill positions. As a matter of fact, in 2022, there were 9 million unfilled positions in the U.S. labor or in the U.S. market. And there were 11 million the year before that. So this is a wide-reaching problem that's been around for a few years. One of the other kind of corollary things that have been going on over the past several decades is the quality of U.S. jobs in the U.S. labor market has been going down steadily, to the point that now we have over 44% of the workers in the U.S. labor market earn a low hourly wage. That's 44%. That's really large. That's 53 million people. Only 2 out of 5 Americans believe that they have a good job. That also is a staggering number. So in many ways, the United States labor market has a job quality problem, and it will require more than increased pay to solve. So when we set out to sort of address the multitude of problems, it's not just that it's a tight labor market. There are a lot of different things that are happening, or pain points that bring employers to the solution that the Job Quality Toolkit, the solutions that the Job Quality Toolkit can provide. So the first of which is attracting talent. We used to be in a time when employers were doing the picking and could essentially select the best, the top, the cream of the crop. And now the world has changed, and we've moved from that choosing the best candidate to competing to be the best candidate themselves, to be the employer of choice. And that's a big culture shift. And many organizations haven't come to that overt reality. They just feel the pain of it in many ways. And so that means they need to attract new workers. And many businesses, especially small and medium-sized businesses, are working on developing the product, getting better, bringing in capital or cash. The notion of also then having to turn a big part of their energies to these issues and problems of how do I attract, how do I retain, how do I grow the talent that I do have, and then what do I do when they retire? That can be overwhelming for a lot of employers. James, next slide. The Baldrige Performance Excellence Program is a part of the Department of Commerce under the National Institute of Standards and Technology. And the Baldrige program has had a framework for essentially managing all aspects of an organization. It's a broad, all-encompassing tool. It's not just one thing like lean or other small situated tools that a business might use. It's a framework for how you manage the entire operation of the organization. And this model has been around for 36 years. It's tried, true, and tested. And it turns out a big portion of that is a focus on workforce. So when we started developing the Job Quality Toolkit, we started borrowing from a lot of this wisdom that we've basically built over the last several decades. And we did a deep dive into the literature, met with think tanks, had small businesses, large businesses, all essentially become a part of a team that collaborated to build the Job Quality Toolkit. The literature that we found, James, could you do the next slide, that we researched, we found that there are these kind of 8 big drivers of job quality from the worker's perspective. So this isn't something that comes from the employer's perspective, which again is kind of a bit of that culture shift and change. in terms of how we look at what is the problem for who and why. So the problem from the employer's point of view is I need people and I need skilled people. And from the worker's point of view, it's I want a job and I want a good job. So as it turns out, and I mentioned before, pay is not the only element of a good job. There's job satisfaction and job security are kind of these two big anchors of job quality from an employee's point of view. And there are many levers that can change job satisfaction and job security. And these 8 drivers essentially are anchoring down and showing you different strategies and actions that you can take to address that job satisfaction and that job security. James, can you move to the next slide? Ooh, these are the small ones. So apologies for the small font, but I will essentially just walk through and discuss with you and tell you when we are, well, actually, before I do that, let me move back up to the slide before again, James. I want to say something really quick about the different drivers. So when we look at these different drivers, you see that it kind of starts from recruitment and hiring, moves to benefits, where it's essentially those are things from the workers that they need and it meets their needs. You see DEIA, empowerment representation, job security and working conditions, organizational culture, pay, skills, and career advancement. We've mentioned before that this is from the worker's perspective. The most critical thing that has to happen before going on a good jobs journey is that the managers and leaders of an organization start a dialogue with their workforce, because you don't want to have a disconnect between, hey, this is what I thought a good job was going to be for you, and find out that for those workers, from their perspective, that wasn't the good job they were looking for. So I wanted to back up to say it's really important to arrive at your solutions through dialogue with your workforce. Okay, James, let's move on to the next slide. So when we're talking about recruitment and hiring, it's, it sounds very abstract, and you're like recruitment and hiring, but fundamentally it's about finding a fit. You're trying to find and be the best fit for the workforce that's out there waiting to connect to you. How that happens is really kind of complicated in some ways. So it might take some energy. And as Tammy mentioned, we understand that small to medium-sized businesses might not have a huge HR workforce that's out there trying to find that talent. So choosing the right strategic strategies and actions becomes critical in order for you to be the most effective you can be in making that connection. So things like making sure that you are using an implementation of skills, the skills to hiring. Sometimes you can see things where they have 4-year degree required. Well, is it required? Or are there fundamental skills in there that need to match what you're looking for? So making sure that it all kind of makes sense. Once you do build a great job description and it's really accurate and explains exactly what the job is going to be, you hire that wonderful person. You want to make sure you do onboarding. There is a very common practice of not onboarding, and you can research and find out what that is, an individual into your organization. People decide, and they've done lots of literature on this, studies, that people will decide to leave a job within the first 90 days of working in the job. And they make a big portion of that decision within their first few days of working at an organization. If it seems like you don't care about them and that they don't belong from the start, or you're not making efforts for them to belong, that's the first part of them starting to detach. And it's an emotional thing. And that can be a little uncomfortable for employers, but it's the truth. Making sure that you have a formal retention plan is very important. Knowing what your workers need and what will keep them is key. Ask your stars in your workplace, why do you stay? What makes you stay? James, can you go to the next slide? So when we talk about this notion of what's going to make someone stay, there's this interesting concept in psychology where they talk about an individual feeling good about where they are and what they're doing, that they have a sense of mastery and control in their lives. Those are huge things that all of us need in all aspects of our lives. One of the number one things we're finding employees will say is a reason for why they leave their job is that they never get trained on their job. They get frustrated because they don't have the tools, the skills, or the control to do the job that they were hired to do. expecting, I don't know about you all, but I certainly had some math teachers in my high school and my college and my graduate school even that were incredibly smart people, but they did not know how to teach. And one of the common practices that many employers will do is throw someone onto the floor and have like the seasoned person who really knows what they're doing and say, hey, just shadow this person, and have no real formal sense of how that's going to go and what that involves. Apprenticeship is great. Just throwing someone into a situation is not. So having something of a plan is really important. And having job skills training that are relevant to the job is also critical. The other critical aspect of this cross-training, where you have more than one person knowing how to do a critical skill set. If there are key positions in your workforce, and not just leadership and managers, but key doers of what you need to have done, you need to make sure that someone else is cross-trained on that, or you have another solution. And those are all kinds of things that happen with planning. I always like to talk about how at NIST, we have this individual who's a glass blower, and she is the only glass blower that they could find. There are no other individuals that they've been able to recruit and hire for the job. Even training her on the position became a difficult thing. The glass that she uses is hard to find the supply for. There's all these different elements where there's this huge vulnerability because they're only one person deep on that bench. So I think you all probably know the pain of those issues and can speak to it. But many of an organization doesn't have a plan for how that individual fits, all the way from how you're going to come into and be a part of our culture and have it explained to you, to how do you know your job and how do you know you're doing it well, so you can feel good about doing that job. So I'll leave those alone. Move on to the next. James, if you can go to the next slide. We understand that this is very overwhelming and that in many ways, this isn't something that any and all organizations just know how to do. So we have come to find that the toolkit has great examples and has a lot of guidance in it, but the best recipe is actually having you as an organization partner with an intermediary. There are all kinds of organizations out there, and you're going to meet 3 great ones today that can help you on this good jobs journey. So don't feel like you're alone, and maybe don't try and think that you have to do it alone, because there's a lot of folks out there who are willing to help you. Oh, I moved on. James, can you go to the next slide? So the consulting paradigm is really one that we would like to introduce with this, instead of the notion of downloading the PDF and thinking you're going to go about doing all of this on your own. Make sure you reach out and connect, and you're going to find some folks you can connect with later on in this presentation. Okay, James, next slide.
Thank you, Kelly, for that
Sure.
overview of the Good Jobs Toolkit and the recommendations related to training and recruiting. It is an incredibly valuable resource. It is now my favorite part of any webinar or event, the time when we hear from real people working directly with business owners every day to make these topics come to life and super practical. Today, we are joined by 3 extraordinary leaders from fantastic organizations representing different parts of the small business support ecosystem. We have Dina Rabiner, the Vice President of Economic Development at the Brooklyn Chamber of Commerce. We have Dave Ray, who is the Managing Director of the Human Capital Team at Catalyst Connection. And we have Heather Tinsley-Fix, a Senior Advisor for Employer Engagement at AARP. I could tell you all a ton of super impressive things about Dina, Dave, and Heather and their organizations, but I'm going to leave that to them. What I will tell you is that they are each serving small employers in a range of incredibly valuable ways every day. And today they're going to share some of their insights, tools, and guidance to help small employers like you recruit and retain talent. With that, and without further delay, welcome Gina, Dave, and Heather.
Thank you.
I'm going to start by asking each of you to share, to introduce yourselves and share a bit about your organization. And given where you are on my screen, I'm going to start with you, Dave.
Great. Thanks, Tammy. Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for providing me the opportunity to participate on the panel. My name is Dave Ray, and I'm with Catalyst Connection. We're a 501c3 economic development and management consulting firm. We're a regional affiliate of the Manufacturing Extension Partnership national network that focuses on supercharging innovation and growth for small and medium-sized manufacturers in the Pittsburgh region. But in collaboration with the Department of Commerce's National Institute of Standards and Technology, the MEP National Network provides a national support system for manufacturers. So there's one MEP center in each state across the country, including Puerto Rico, and we share best practices and technical expertise to ensure that American manufacturers remain at the forefront of global competition. My role as managing director at Catalyst, I support two teams of practitioners. One is focused on tackling the skill shortage, worker skills shortage, addressing the social and income disparities in our region, and providing students with real life examples of manufacturing careers. The other team focuses on people-centric strategies within companies that drive high-performing cultures to build strong relationships in the local labor market. This conversation is timely, very timely, because just yesterday, First Lady Biden and Secretary of Labor Sue visited our building and offices to spotlight Pittsburgh as one of the country's 5 workforce hubs, which is a collaboration of partnerships with local employers, educational institutions, unions, and community organizations, which Catalyst is a part of. So I look forward to sharing strategies and tactics that we have found to be successful within companies here in Pittsburgh and the overall workforce ecosystem itself. And I also look forward to hearing from my fellow panelists.
Thanks, Dave. Super cool that y'all were named a hub yesterday. Heather, you're up next.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for having me. My name is Heather Tinsley-Fix, and I work at AARP, where I focus on engaging with you, the employer community, including small employers, on the value of age diversity and the value of that all ages bring to the workforce. We do talk about the value of older workers, obviously, that's our constituency, but we also really firmly believe that it's actually this mix of ages that when you leverage it is a real competitive advantage. So I work with employers to show them sort of the strategies and tactics around that. And just in a wider context, you might be wondering why AARP is focused on this issue because, we were formerly known as the American Association of Retired Persons, not working persons. But, times have changed a lot since we were founded over 60 years ago. People are living much longer and they're working much longer and they want to work longer. So there's like a financial aspect, but then there's a social aspect of working longer. So our mission at AARP is to empower people to choose how they live as they age, and that often includes working.
Thanks, Heather. Welcome. And last, but certainly not least, welcome, Dina Rabiner.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. I'm Dina Rabiner. I'm with the Brooklyn Chamber of Commerce in Brooklyn, New York, which is a borough of New York City, which in population terms would probably be the 4th largest city in the United States. And the Brooklyn Chamber is focused on supporting the business community and creating a healthy and robust business environment for all. Our goal is we have kind of 4 main goals: promotion, support, advocacy, and convening. And while we are a membership organization, there's a lot that we do to support small businesses that you don't have to be a member, you don't even have to necessarily be in Brooklyn for all of our services. We have something called Good Help Staffing Service, which is basically serving as the HR arm for small businesses. So small businesses usually when I'm talking about usually 10 employees or less, don't have the capacity or don't have an HR person, don't have an HR department, let alone an HR person who can write job descriptions, who can post, who can interview. So we serve that role, which is, very important. We also have a workforce development committee, which does a lot of public events, usually on Zoom, so that everyone can access them. And we talk about, legal issues for small businesses, different HR practices, practical tips that the small business owner can apply to their own business. And
Welcome.
I'll stop there. There's a lot more that we do, but that's not there.
Undoubtedly. And I will tell you that being reminded that Brooklyn would be the 4th largest city if it were a city is mind-boggling. So each of you works with small employers in slightly different or maybe very different contexts. And so what I'd like to hear is, given the work that you each do, talk about some of the challenges you see that small employers experience as they seek to attract and retain and develop top talent. And since we ended with you, Dina, we'll start with you and go back the other way.
Sure. Well, I mean, capacity is definitely, important. A small business owner, usually goes into their small business. It's usually their passion, but they don't necessarily have the skill or the time to do all functions of that business. So that's why, like I said, with our Good Help staffing service, we help with the attracting the talent. We have a very wide network. So we post jobs, we help them write those job descriptions. We do that initial interviewing for them so that they can, bring in that talent. We also are working very closely with manufacturers now to promote registered apprenticeships and helping manufacturers build up or implement a registered apprenticeship program within their workplace, also as a means to not only attract talent, keep talent, and in the long run, there's benefits for both parties in terms of job satisfaction and so forth. So those are some of the things.
Thanks. Heather, tell us about the challenges you typically see and some of the things you all do to address those challenges.
So the probably the biggest challenge that we hear from small employers when we talk to them is they're trying to fill positions, right? It's the war for talent, or the competition for talent. And so they come to us often thinking that we have a close personal relationship with all 38 million members of AARP, and unfortunately we don't. And we're not really a recruiting agency, so we can't offer that kind of help that Dina's talking about, which I think is invaluable. But we do provide the AARP Employer Pledge Program that employers can sign. It's a public affirmation that you value experienced workers and that you value age diversity in general. And you can use, there's like a badge that comes with that you can use on your recruiting materials. And we also offer other resources for employers, which I can talk about later. I did want to mention one more thing, which is a challenge that we often hear from smaller employers, is that in order to attract good employees, or just attract employees at all, a lot of the time what they're hearing from the candidates is, what are the benefits? What benefits do you offer? And it can be really challenging for a small business to offer benefits because they're really expensive. And so, that was one of the aspects of the Good Jobs framework that we talked about earlier. So that's another thing I hear. And there's ways you can build a culture, and I know, Dave, you're going to talk about this, that are provide support, maybe not benefits per se, but for example, we have a whole toolkit on how to support the caregivers in your workforce. And a lot of the ways you can do that are free. So there's ways to provide support and culture if you can't provide super rich benefits, but that is the challenge that I hear.
We hear that often. Benefits are expensive, and in as you said, the formal ways are very hard to offer. Dave, you work with manufacturers. What challenges do you see? Because it is undoubtedly similar but unique challenges in that space.
Yeah, I just want to touch on what Heather just mentioned around benefits. We see companies that are moving away from the one-size-fits-all benefit package and create customized approaches to benefits to fit their employees' current needs, right? Whether that's based on age or family situation. So that's been very positive. In terms of challenges, I think we really touched on it around the skills gap and retention. Retention starts from within. That, in our experience, and from what we're hearing from manufacturers, that's their number one problem, is retention. If they can solve the retention problem, then it's easier to solve the skills gap and attracting talent. And around retention, we're looking at three things. We find that three things are important. One, employees want a supportive boss. They want defined career paths with milestones, with objective measures within those milestones, and they want feedback. Me being a Gen Xer, if I have a job and only one of those things is meeting my needs, I might stick it out and just hope the other two come around. But what we're finding with Gen Z is that they're making those a condition of employment. So the newest generation into work want all three, and if they can't find it, at a click of a button or a swipe of a finger, they find a new job. So it really creates a need, a necessity for companies to have a complete change in mindset around how they approach work, how do they approach the employee value proposition, and how they really approach their employer brand to help retain to retain employees. The other ones are around skills gap, and in manufacturing, it's around advanced technology skills, so around robotics, data analytics, AI, advanced programming, and we're finding that the available talent doesn't have those skills. So it's been mentioned a couple of times today, pre-apprenticeships and apprenticeship programs. To me, that is the number. If I'm a company and I'm looking to develop talent, I want to look at developing my own threads within the schools so that I'm building a talent stream from the school directly into my company. So working with your local high schools to develop a pre-apprenticeship program that where the curriculum aligns with your employment needs, in this case, advanced technologies, where they come into work at an advanced standing in the registered apprenticeship program. It's a fantastic model, and we've seen huge successes with it.
Makes a ton of sense. Retention and the skills gap. So starting with you and building on that, what do you all offer as tools to help small employers overcome, tools and resources, I would say, to overcome those two particular challenges? And are you recommending that individual employers work with educational institutions, or are there kind of community-based or broader industry efforts in that direction?
Yeah, it's a combination of both. So we find that employers are establishing close relationships with their local technical colleges or the local high schools, with their organizations like Catalyst and other MEP centers and other community-based organizations that are the intermediary between the organization and the training organizations or the community-based organizations. The registered apprenticeship programs, in our experience, it's at least in Pennsylvania, it's very cumbersome for a company to get an apprenticeship registered through the state. So we took that burden on. So we have a registered apprenticeship program that we can drop in place into a company at a significantly reduced cost. There's a ton of local, federal, state funding around apprenticeship programs, whether it's through a state training fund or other funds that can support training and wage reimbursement. So working with those community-based organizations to find your local resources to help offset those costs and to take the burden off of the individual companies. We're seeing that widespread across the country.
Dina, you led with the real challenge that is inherent in small employers' capacity, and you mentioned the good jobs service and apprenticeships. Are there other things you all offer, or is there more to share about this notion of outsourcing kind of the HR function or the apprenticeship piece?
Sure. I mean, we'll just kind of to add on to what like Dave was talking about. I mean, we also serve as an intermediary, and we're also the lack of skills or that are needed for certain jobs. We also really help in if a job seeker or an employer is looking for a certain type of employee. We also work with workforce development programs. So to ensure that people can get those skills that are needed, and also create that funnel and those partnerships between the workforce development provider and the small business, so that they know where to go. If they're looking for X type of employee with this certain skill set, they know that certain organizations are doing those types of training programs. We can help create that connection.
Makes a ton of sense. Heather, more to add on any of the resources that AARP has to address the common challenges?
Yeah, so if you go to aarp.org/employers, that'll take you to our employer portal, and there's a section for small businesses there. And we have a number of tip sheets, and we're growing this content every day. So, however, right now we have one on age-inclusive hiring practices. We have one on, if you're a small organization, how do you build a mentoring program? We have one on building a financial wellness program. And so we've got, tip sheets around those types of functions, and how do you do that as a small employer, and how do you do that with an age-inclusive lens. And then we also have our pledge, which you can find by going to aarp.org/employer pledge. We do have, it's a free program. It's a pledge that you make, right? But then when you're in the program, we have quarterly calls where we provide experts on various topics. Coming up in December, we're going to be having The Economist come in and talk about research they did about mental health and its impact at work and supporting employees that way. We have a ton of caregiving resources, just not only for employers to support their caregivers, but for the caregivers themselves. So there's just an enormous amount of like lunch and learns and workbooks, and so there's tons of, and it's all free. So those are some things I'd mention.
So you mentioned that the resources are all free, and we have a question from one of the members of the audience that businesses like theirs experience financial constraints on providing training and these sorts of developments. Are there additional thoughts on ways that training can be increased without, by either free or minimizing costs? Thoughts on the sort of cost burden from the perspective of the employer? You're each nodding, so it looks like Dina, you're going to hop in.
Sure. I mean, so we're part of the Skill Up Coalition, which, if you go to the brooklynchamber.com and look under our Good Help staffing service, it'll be listed there. But there is lists of different training programs that are not necessarily local to New York, many of which are national. So an employer can tap into those workforce development training programs and use them for their own employees, and then kind of even maybe go one further step and reach out to that organization that's providing the training and establish a partnership with them. So if they know they're hiring for say customer sales representatives and they have that need, they can work with an organization specifically so that there's that funnel of people, of talent. And there's many of these programs are free because they're subsidized by the organizations.
Dave, Heather, anything to add on the expense burden or the cost burden for employers on training?
Yeah, a couple of things. I mentioned some of the state training funds, federal training funds. If you're a manufacturer, reach out to your local MEP or just Google your state training funds, and there's usually something that will pop up that you can tap into. The other thing is forming collaborations or cohorts with companies within your neighborhood to leverage the training funds, the training dollars that you have, kind of offsets those costs that way too.
And we have a platform for employers to offer training to their employees that is in collaboration with an organization called MindEdge. They provide training on all kinds of business skills, hard and soft, and they're really reasonable. They range from like $40 to I think about $300 for like a whole course, like a 6-month course or something. And there are things like digital marketing, bookkeeping, leadership skills, cybersecurity. There's just a lot. It's a big library of skills that that you can send your employees to there and either reimburse them or I'm not sure other methods you would have for paying for that, but employers in the pledge program get 10% off of those courses, so that's something. And then the other thing I wanted to mention is that a lot of times technical platforms, so Salesforce, Amazon Web Services, Google, all the different Google platforms, they often provide totally free training because of course they want more people to use their platforms, and so that can be a way to like, let's say if you want to implement Salesforce at your organization, you can get free training for your employees to learn how to use it, and not just use it, but set it up and things like that. So that's another thing I would mention. And then there's also YouTube, LinkedIn, and so on. But a lot of times there's just a big incentive for those tech companies to train your employees for free.
Makes sense. Dina.
I just want to make a plug for just chambers. I mean, many, like for example, the Brooklyn Chamber has also relationships with universities and community colleges. And, they offer lots of benefits to members, like discounts. So if you are looking to provide additional training for your employees, or just access to, to graduate work or, additional courses. Look at your local chamber, because they might have a relationship with the university or local college, and can provide really discounted classes.
Super helpful. So when we prepared for this conversation, culture came up quite a few times as a key piece of the puzzle for small employers. And both you, Dave, and you, Heather, mentioned the dimension of culture, as did Kelly earlier in the call. Dave, starting with you, much of your work focuses on helping leadership teams get the culture right. And how can small employers assess whether their culture is strong? And how do you know if you have a problem? And what do you do when improvements to culture are needed? Just a small question.
Yeah, well, you have a problem when you have a revolving door outside and people are leaving. I was working with a company a number of years ago. They had 150% turnover rate. So people were literally coming in and just leaving sometimes the same day. And I called it the mirror test, where if you walked in, you could fog up a mirror, they would hire you. So there was really no intentional process of vetting them out or skills-based testing or anything like that. But in terms of culture, it really starts at the top. So when we're working with companies that either have a retention issue or just want to be a higher performing culture, we like to start with the senior leadership team. I've had several companies come to me and say, hey, we want to change our culture. We want to do frontline supervisor training. We kick off the frontline supervisor training, and the CEO says, or walks in, or the production manager says, hey guys, we're changing our culture and we're starting with you. And they think that it's more punitive than it is in the spirit of professional development. And there have been times where I've just have pulled the plug on that training because it wouldn't have been a good situation. So starting at the top, getting the senior leadership team all aligned and working towards a common goal. We usually stick them in a room for 2 days and really dive deep into their interpersonal relationships to make sure that everybody's on the same page. And at the end of that workshop, we usually have mapped out a strategic people-centric strategy, right? It's a people-centric strategy. Instead of, hey, how can we get more product out the door? How can we keep more people in? And we start there, and then that just cascades down into the organization, where we get everybody talking in a common language around how we value and respect employees, and how we're going to meet those three things of being supportive supervisors and bosses, having career plans and learning journeys, and providing feedback. Stay interviews are really important. So most companies are familiar with the exit interviews when somebody leaves, or asking them why they left. Stay interviews are more proactive. Hey, why do you stay here? What are your concerns? What can we do to make it a better workplace for you? We use a tool called Rabbit, RHABIT. It's a weekly culture pulse. So we use it here at Catalyst and several of our clients. So we know week to week, we can assess our organizational health and be able to respond to it just in time. So that's just kind of top layer, why that's so important, but it certainly starts at the top.
I love that. And I love the notion of a stay interview. I think most places you think about, oh, once you walked out the door, let's find out why. But if you thought about it as let's check in and do a stay interview, you might have different outcomes. Heather, I know that culture is something that you are passionate about and focus on as well. What would you add?
I think, so from an age inclusive lens, this happens all the time. Surveys go out and they say, what do younger workers want? What do older workers want? People want the same things regardless of age and generation, but they interpret it a little differently. And so that's something to keep in mind. Is it's really, it's sort of baked into DEI work, but you have to sort of shed stereotypes, and you have to really listen and get underneath what appear to be differences between people. And so that's something I would add. I'll give you a really small example. I heard on NPR this story about an older boss sending an email to his direct report, and he said something like, where is that report, ... And the younger person, who happens to be a millennial, was horrified. They were like, this is like a threatening email. The older boss had no clue, didn't have a clue that was what was coming across. He didn't mean it that way at all. And I thought, oh, this is interesting, but this is like, an NPR story. So I asked my brother-in-law, who's a millennial, and I'm Gen X, and I was like, if someone sent you an email and had this ... he was like, oh, yeah, I would. That to me would seem like, calling me on the carpet and all this stuff. So it's a very small example, but it's it's just it's a good illustration that, for example, all generations want to be respected at work. The way that shows up for an older person might be a little different than the way it shows up for a younger person. So it's just important to have this dialogue, to have active listening, and to, if you are perceiving conflict or frustration or the revolving door, that you really try to get underneath what's driving that. Because a lot of times what appear to be differences between people are just the way it interprets or shows up versus the underlying need or desire.
Super, super important reminder. Dina, anything to add on culture?
Not that much. I mean, we don't really, that's not really our wheelhouse. Although we do, like I said, like we do have these public like lunch and learns where we discuss many of these issues. So that's what our workforce development committee does. But yeah, we don't work directly in it. But I'm taking notes. I think it's really interesting.
So I am looking at the chat, and someone asked about informative job descriptions. And I think, Dave, I'm going to start with you there and invite Dina or Heather to pile on. But I think that's a place where you have lots of guidance. I hope that's a place where you have lots of guidance.
Yeah. So job descriptions, job postings, super critical to create clarity around expectations. One thing is they have to be updated. It's funny because we just had this conversation internally here today where jobs have been changing, but we haven't updated the job description, which then creates conflict. So keeping a close pulse to ensuring job descriptions are updated. We do what's called a success profile. So it looks at job dimensions, job tasks, competencies, and skills. Just related to that, job postings, super important. A lot of times you look on Indeed and it's a copy and paste of the job description, whereas a job posting should be a marketing piece. So it should be promoting your company. We talk about treating your job candidate like a customer. Websites are important too. You go onto a website and they kind of all look the same and it's just basically pushing product, but it doesn't talk about the employee experience, the employee value proposition, what it's like to work at your company. And a lot of times we're working with companies who have great cultures but don't promote it outside the four walls, and it's a missed opportunity. So using the job description to create clarity internally and using a job posting to create energy and momentum around that reputation that you have in the local labor market is a great place to work.
That's super helpful. Dina, many of the resources you described, good help for outsourced HR, are, as you said, offered because small employers don't have capacity or they lack scale. Some of the folks in the audience, most of the folks in the audience are business owners themselves, but some are organizations that provide services to businesses in their networks. And I think we would love to see models like yours. So 2 questions. Does the Good Help service serve employers outside of the footprint of Brooklyn? And if not, is there advice you would give to another chamber or an ecosystem support player to create a service like Good Help? What does it take?
Sure. So Good Health is it's primarily Brooklyn based, although we do sometimes post for New York City, for just greater New York City. And I mean, I would work, if your chamber, doesn't have one, you might have like a local development corporation. You also might check in with like your local YMCA. Your different local community organizations might have that type of capacity, or even like your local business improvement districts. While it might not be as robust as a Good Help staffing service, they serve that function to help small businesses in their community to attract employees. So, and even libraries. I mean, here in Brooklyn it's a large, obviously large Brooklyn Public Library is a large system, but they have a whole career services department, of which, a small business can use. So, and I'm sure, across the US, there's the same type of resources.
Super helpful. Someone else in the chat has come back to your question or your comment earlier, Heather, about creative benefits. And the question is, are there other creative benefit options that you can think of outside of benefits like healthcare and retirement funds? Do you panelists, starting with you, Heather, have ideas on resources for how small employers can create and implement creative benefits?
Yeah, I just want to quickly say super quick about job descriptions that or job postings, I'm sorry, that one very small thing you can do is to, when you list the years of experience needed, that you don't cap it. So if you don't say 3 to 5 years experience, you say at least 3 years experience. And that signals to older workers that, like, let's say they want to downshift and do a less demanding job, or let's say they want to pivot and learn a new skill, and so they're willing to take a more junior role. That signals to that candidate pool that you welcome candidates of all ages, as long as they have 3 years experience, right? So don't cap the years of experience, and don't use words like digital native and recent college grad, because that's really skating on the line of ageism. So getting back to creative benefits, so I'm going to draw an example from actually a really big organization, but I'm going to apply it in the small business context. So Hilton is huge. They're huge. They're one of our pledge signers, and they offer, among the many other benefits they offer employees like super reduced stays at hotels. They offer travel benefits, essentially. That's because that's already a sunk cost for them. They're already in that business. So what are you doing as a small business that you're already doing that might be able to provide a related benefit? Or do you have relationships with other organizations that have perks that you could arrange for just for your small employee base? Like, hey, can you just give my 10 employees a discount on such and such? So that's one idea I have. And in that vein, AARP.org, AARP membership, if you want to reach out to me, we have a special offer for AARP membership to employers that is, the employer doesn't pay anything. They just pass the discount on to their employees. And there's just a ton of benefits and discounts you get from AARP membership. So I'll just mention that. Reach out to me if you're interested in learning more about that offer. And then lastly, I would say, going back to this caregiving thing, there's so much stuff at aarp.org/caregiving that is available to you for your caregivers for free. We have a caregiving call center. We have videos on all kinds of small medical tasks that a lot of times caregivers have to undertake. We have financial workbooks. We have preparing to care guides. We have we can come in and do training to your staff for free, on Zoom about these topics. So that's another, again, that's I think not only a cultural signal that you value the whole person, but also that you can just provide for free through us. So feel free to check that out.
Other thoughts on creative benefits before we have time, I think, for one last question for you all?
No, but there's a question in the chat about restaurant training. There's a great restaurant in Cleveland, Ohio called Edwin's, EDWINS. And it's a restaurant. It's a 4-star restaurant, but it's also a training. They've created a culinary school within the restaurant, and they train formerly incarcerated, and everybody that works there was in the prison system at one point in their life, and it's just an incredible place. And if I can just make a comment about talent too, in terms of sourcing talent, oftentimes you hear that people say, well, you have to find the hidden talent. Well, talent really isn't hidden, right? You just have to look, you have to be open to considering different streams. And oftentimes you often hear of talent streams, but if you think about water pipelines are closed off with minimal ability to change course, whereas a stream is open with multiple entry points. So we refer to it as talent streams. and think about non-traditional candidates like recovering addicts, uniquely abled, veterans, formerly incarcerated, refugees, all, viable sources, viable options for employment. There's many training programs built behind that and many employment services built behind it. So I would just encourage you to reach out to your local organizations that support those groups that could help address some of your skill shortages.
Love that. We have time for one last question. And what is the one thing that you want the small employers who join this conversation to take away and do in the context of recruiting and retaining talent? Let's start with you, Dina.
Sure. One is to just expand your network. You're not in it alone. Being a business owner can be a very, very lonely. And there's a lot of organizations out there to support you, whether it's your chamber, whether it's, a local organization. We want, small businesses to succeed. And there's plenty of support out there, whether it's finding talent, whether it's finding training programs, retaining employees, everything that everyone has shared. There's so much out there. Sometimes it does take a little bit of research. So that's where, organizations like chambers come into play, because they can help, guide you and be a little bit more efficient. We also run like a small business solution center, which is in partnership with the New York City Small Business Services. And there's lots of resources available there, including, free courses as well. So, you kind of use your network. You don't have to look very far.
Thanks, Gina. Heather, guidance.
I'd say the one thing that I would like to get across is to think of creatively how to diversify your sourcing strategies. So Dave mentioned apprenticeships. There's also return to work programs, which is a great way to get people who've taken time off for caregiving or other reasons to get them back into the workforce. And it's kind of like a trial period for both of you to figure out if you like them and they like you. Return to work programs are one. Going to job fairs. I mean, I know that it's easier at scale to go with the Indeeds of the world, and you should do those, but you can also go to local job fairs or connect with local or professionally specific job boards. That can also be a way to diversify, and then use your existing employees as a network for referrals. And this works particularly well for older folks because they tend to get jobs through referrals more than, everybody does, right? But it's even more concentrated in older workers. And also the last thing I would say is to really focus on, could you hire someone that has 3/4 of the skills you need and then just train them up on the last quarter? Can you be open about the kind of candidates that you're considering? Because there are some hard skills, but a lot of jobs are powered by these human skills. We call them soft skills, but like human skills, and those can be applied in so many different contexts.
Thanks, Heather. Dave, last word is yours.
Yeah, mine would be if the majority of the participants on this call today are business owners, I'm sure they have a pretty good handle on their financial statements and their sales pipeline. I'm wondering if they have a similar handle on their organizational health. We typically do financial statement reviews every month, but we give feedback to employees sometimes just once a year through the performance review process, which we hear is kind of like meaningless and not doesn't help their growth. So what I would suggest tomorrow, if you haven't done so already, go out there and start talking to employees. Find out why employees love working for you, what makes them passionate about working for your company and their job. Lean into those things and reinforce those things that are working well. Address the issues and concerns that they might have. Really focus on your employee value proposition as much as you do your product value proposition. Keep a pulse on that, whether it's weekly, monthly, the annual survey is good too. Look at Glassdoor and Indeed. There's reviews that you might not even know exist that employees leave, just like restaurant reviews, they leave company reviews. Sometimes there's some shocking stuff out there that you might not know exist. And address it, right? We work with a lot of small companies where the company owner is out on the production floor every day saying hi to people. But as those companies grow, the first thing those employees tell us is, hey, that guy used to come out and say hi. Now that they're growing, they forgot about us. So don't forget about your people. If you say your people are your number one asset, truly act like that every day.
Thank you. I cannot thank the three of you enough for this robust and rich and informative conversation. Thank you, Kelly Welsh from NIST and Baldrige, and thank you to Commerce for partnering on this. I also want to thank everyone for taking the time to participate in this webinar. Each of the organizations that you heard from today has resources. We will be distributing both the recording and the slide deck, along with links to their tools, so that you can access them. I would invite you also to visit the Department of Commerce's website that has the toolkit on it. You can see the URL here, as well as I invite you to the Reimagine Main Street Good Jobs page. With that, thank you all for joining us this afternoon. Appreciate your interest and your time and the expertise from our panelists. Thank you, and thank you. The webinar is now complete.
Thank you.